for me, I want to know what the limiting factors are that are holding my athletes back from elite performance. From a speed standpoint, I'll put those into three categories: force development, rate of force development, and neuromuscular coordination. And then, so I'm going to come back in a minute and talk about how the weight room fits in here. But in terms of speed training, I'll rely on three primary methods: heavy resisted, light resisted, or assisted sprinting. And each of those methods has shown to me to be more effective at addressing one of these limitations. So I'll just talk through it. Some of you might have seen a few pieces I put out. By the way, I'm putting most of my stuff on LinkedIn now. Don't look a lot in the peer-reviewed journals. I don't have the time, probably, or the patience to deal with that like I have in the past. But I talk about a data set of high school and college football players, and a process of trying to determine how much strength actually contributes to speed. Below 1.7 times body weight in a parallel squat, strength accounts for about 25% of the variance in speed. Above 1.7, I couldn't find any variance accounted for by strength. So for me, if I want to determine if force is a limiting factor of speed, I start with what's their parallel back squat to body weight ratio. If it's less than 1.7, then there's a higher force limitation than if it's above 1.7. Since working with the 1080 sprint, I've now started to look at how Newton force during the sprinting motion. So, and this is very different based on our position groups because body sizes are different, makeup is different. But just as an idea to throw a level out, if I see less than 250 newtons of peak force in a sprint, then I'm more concerned about force development as a limiting factor. And I will then pair that athlete with more heavy resisted sprints. So heavy resisted sprint addressing force development more than light resisted sprints, which affects it more than assisted sprinting. Assisted sprinting has very little impact on the force development component. Heavy resisted sprinting has a great deal of effect on force development in sprinting. For rate of force development, I'm looking at just as some general rules here: 2,000 watts or less in a body weight split jump, or less than 1,000 watts of peak power in sprinting. Again, just looking at some numbers on the 1080 sprint. Those ratios and the ones I'll talk about on coordination come from just looking at data. Are really fast guys and are slower guys. We don't have really slow guys, but looking at a range of speed and seeing what some of their ratios look like. So for rate of force development, I found that light resisted has the greatest impact, assisted sprinting next, and heavy resisted has little but some impact on rate of force development. And then the really kicker here is neuromuscular coordination. I do EMG sprint testing, so I put EMG sensors, wireless sensors on the leg muscles during a sprint. Won't go into a lot of it today because of time and just feasibility to do so, but in research, I've identified different coordination flaws that affect sprint speed, and tested over time different methods to train those flaws or to get positive adaptations in that coordination. But just to kind of, so you see what I look at, if I see more than one coordination flaws, there's 5 or 6 of them that I generally look for. If there's more than one, then I'm concerned about neuromuscular coordination. The more they have, the more concerned I am. But I started kind of looking at ratios between split squat power and speed squat power. So a bilateral power output versus a split stance. And our really fast guys are generally over 0.75. Or I'm looking at now some single leg vertical jump to a vertical jump power ratio, and our really fast guys are generally over 0.6. So what I'm assuming, what I'm kind of using a step-by-step process of thought here. If power is low in a bilateral speed squat or a vertical jump, then power is the limiting factor. But if there's good power in that, but not as good power in a split stance or a single leg, then I start thinking, okay, this might be a coordination pattern, because those single leg split stance exercises are more complex from a nervous system standpoint. So just trying to extrapolate out some of these concepts. But if I see an athlete that I have concerns about being neuromuscular coordinated, I'll use more assisted sprinting. Shown very, very good effectiveness in altering some of these coordination patterns. Light resisted is second to that, and heavy resisted last. So you kind of see this process. Now, we're training all of these things all the time. Our athletes are also doing heavy, light, and assisted all the time. But what changes is the focus. The amount of training volume will be routed higher in the areas where we determine there's a limiting factor. That process is just trying to tailor the training program to the athlete to make sure that they're getting a stimulus that is most effective or is addressing the most important limiting factors. Now, if you don't know, or you can identify what the limiting factor is here, the general approach, you just train everything, which is fine. That's an approach. It's not as complex or sophisticated as doing some measurements, trying to separate athletes into different focal points and addressing those limitations individually for each athlete. And by the way, is vastly more effective when you take the complexity up a little bit. But we're always training all three of those. We're always using all of these methods. It's never one or the other. I hear a lot of debates about resisted sprinting against or assisted sprinting. It's not one or the other. It never has been, and it never should be. But I might have an athlete that I route to more resisted sprinting and another athlete that I route to more assisted sprinting, because I know that the adaptations will be different, and I know that those athletes need a slightly different stimulus in order to reach maximum performance.